You're with Karen on Accentuate the Positive Radio, and I'm so delighted to have on the phone with me Brian Skerry, who is a National Geographic photographer. I saw Brian speaking this week at the Opera House. He's here in Sydney, and he's agreed to have a chat with us on radio. Hi, Brian.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for talking with us on radio. I have to say I loved your talk the other night, and obviously the images were just sublime. My daughter Annika was the one that inspired me to come and see you. She's a big fan of yours. She was watching you and she looked at me and she says, I want to be just like him. I guess you have a fabulous job. What I noticed about the way you presented was when passionate people present, they speak so fluidly and easily, and it comes so easily for you to talk about what you do. Do you find it easy, or do you get nervous when you're speaking to a big crowd?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I think there's always a little anxiety about speaking to large crowds, but once I get into it, once I begin, I sort of forget about that and do get very involved and wrapped up in what I'm discussing. And you know, if it seems passionate, I guess that's real, that's genuine, because I do live this. You know, it's not just something that I discuss when I get up in front of an audience, but it's what I do every day. I'm very involved in ocean issues. I spend my life coming up with ideas for new stories for National Geographic and trying to photograph things that interest me. And a big part of that is trying to share with people the magnificence of what I see underwater, but also some of the problems. So I think it is very genuine, and I think, you know, once I get into the subject matter, that's all that really matters to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. She was saying as she was watching you, she wants to be just like you, and she's given me a couple of questions to ask you. I asked her if she wanted to be here and ask you herself, but she's studying at the moment. So she says, how old were you when you first realized that you wanted to be an underwater photographer?
Right. Well, I'll start by saying that from a very young age, you know, from as young as I can recall, I wanted to be an explorer. I really love the notion of adventure and seeing new things and making discoveries. And as a young boy, I suppose that many types of exploration appealed to me. You know, I fantasized about being an astronaut and going into outer space, or going into the jungles and discovering new species and so forth. So, and the ocean was a big part of that. I certainly was attracted to the water and to the sea. That's where it began. So I wanted to be an explorer. And when I was probably about 15 years old, I began scuba diving. I got certified as a scuba diver and started diving. And it was maybe a year after that, I attended a conference, a diving conference in Boston, near where I live, and I saw underwater photographers and documentary filmmakers showing their work, presenting their films and their images, and that's when I sort of had this epiphany where I said that would be the perfect job for me. I could be an underwater explorer, but do it with a camera. You know, I loved storytelling. I loved, you know, everything from good books to great movies, and the notion of being a visual storyteller really seemed like a perfect fit for me. So I guess it was probably around then, you know, 16 years old or thereabouts, where I really decided that that's what I wanted to do.
And also she wants to know, who inspired you? Who were you looking at when you were young and saying, I want to be just like them?
Yeah, well, you know, in that time period in my life, I was very much inspired by both still photographers and documentary filmmakers. So I remember that some of the people who most inspired me were filmmakers, guys like Al Giddings, who at the time was, you know, larger than life and was doing not only documentary work about animals in the ocean, but he was doing Hollywood movies too. He was the guy behind the movie The Deep and The Abyss and some of these other movies. So it just seemed very appealing to me to be able to do that kind of stuff. There were other guys like Jack McKenney and Peter Gimbel who were making these great films. There were still photographers like Bill Kurtzinger, who actually was the guy that helped me first get into National Geographic, and David Duboulet, and some of these people who had been working for National Geographic for decades doing underwater stories, and that all very much inspired me. So I think it was both the film guys and the still photographers that really spoke to me,
And who inspires you today?
Well, that's a great question. I'm inspired by so many different people today, and many of them are not necessarily underwater photographers. I mean, I do find great inspiration in so many underwater photographers, but I think I look to some of my colleagues at National Geographic who are doing great natural history stories on land. I have a friend, Nick Nichols, at National Geographic, who has for decades been doing tremendous work in places like Africa, walking across the Congo and making pictures of things that we've never seen before. My buddy Steve Winter, who's also a great National Geographic photographer who specializes in big cat stories. He's done recent stories on snow leopards and tigers, and he's up in the Himalaya mountains camping out for months at a time to try to get an elusive picture of a snow leopard, or putting camera traps in India to try to get pictures of tigers and so forth. And so these are the guys that I'm looking to and really getting inspired as well. I mean, certainly ocean people too, but I think photographically, I love to see what's happening terrestrially, by some of these friends of mine.
Doing what you love and getting paid well for it is something that many people aspire. And when I was listening to you the other night, you were saying you were following your dream and following your passion for a long time, and you were saying to yourself, what am I doing? I should get a real job. I could be paid lots of money doing something else, but you kept going.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, National Geographic picked you up about 15 years ago. You've been
Correct.
working for them, and now you're getting paid well for doing what you love. What did keep you going, Brian? How did you stay on course doing what you love when...
Boy, that also is really a great question. You're right. That is exactly the story. From the time I was 16 years old and decided that I wanted to be an underwater photographer, to the time I actually got my first assignment with National Geographic was a fairly long period.
Yeah.
And I came from this working class town in Massachusetts, in the States, a little town. I wasn't born to a lot of money. I didn't have the resources to travel around the world and go to faraway places to make photographs. So I started diving, in my own backyard. I dived in New England waters. I did a lot of shipwreck diving in those early days because that was accessible to me, and I sort of honed my skills both as a diver and as a photographer. But I did many different jobs along the way. I worked in convenience stores, and I worked in factories, and I did sales, and I did everything all the time, keeping my little photo business on the side, which wasn't making much money in those days. It was, probably costing me a lot more because I was spending any money that I did have on new equipment and things that I needed to do. But, there were many days where I remember saying, exactly like you put it, what am I doing? It would be so easy to just pack it in, have a normal life, maybe do some diving on holiday or weekends and so forth, and just make it a hobby. But there was something inside of me that just wouldn't let me quit. I can't really explain it, but I can only say that whenever I thought about that and had a bad day and sort of thought about quitting, the next day I was re-energized and just continued to press on. And eventually it did happen, and that dream did come true. But it's just, I think it's certain people have something inside that just doesn't allow them to give up, even though everything else is telling you should,
Oh, great answer. And I also want to know, how has your family coped with you being away so much? Because you're off, because you said the other night that you're off doing what you love and you're energized and you're pumped and it's happening and it's great. And then you come home and then crash on the couch for a few days watching television, and then you think, okay, that's enough television. I want to go out again.
I know.
And so I'm thinking to myself, you're away a lot. How did your family cope with you not being so present at home?
Well, that's a very important part of the equation, and I am away so much. I typically travel about 8 months or more each year, mostly on assignment in the field doing these stories, and that is a long time to be away. Usually I'm probably away no more than a month at a time, sometimes 6 weeks, and then I'm back home for a couple of weeks, and then you're out again. So it's this very sort of yo-yo kind of life where I'm home, I'm gone, I'm home, I'm gone. So It's very difficult. There's no way around that, and that is the downside of this job. It might seem rather romantic and a bit of a dream, and I have no complaints. But I can only say that my family does cope with it quite well. Thank God for my wife, who we've been together for a long time, and she was with me before I ever started on this path, and knows that it was a dream and really was very supportive. It's because of her that I've been able to do these things. And, we have 2 daughters at home, and it's really all they've ever known. So I don't think it's particularly strange for them, but that doesn't mean it isn't difficult. That being said, there are some perks as well. I can go into their classroom and do a slideshow about my work, and they think that's pretty cool. Or occasionally they get to travel with me. It's not too often when I'm on assignment that happens, because it wouldn't be a very fun trip for them when I'm working 18-hour days on some old boat somewhere. But occasionally they get to follow me at the end of a trip, or we do special trips together because of folks that I've met in various places. And I think that because of that, they sort of get an insight into the world that they might not otherwise have. So it's no easy thing. It's certainly a difficult part of my life is having to be away so much, but having a strong, supportive family and, trying to make the most of the time that we do have together, I think makes it work.
Does any of your family share your passion for the ocean and conservation?
I think all of my family shares my passion for the ocean and for conservation, although they're obviously not engaged in that. My wife has her own career as an occupational therapist, and she does amazing work on her own. My children are, one is age 15, the other one is 8 years old, and they both love the ocean. They absolutely are water kids. They spend as much time in the water as they can whenever we're at the beach or on boats and so forth. And I do think that nature and conservation are big parts of who they are. It's sort of in their DNA, I think, now. They've been brought up with that, and they do have a very strong conservation ethic. Where they'll take that and, whether it will become a career or some job for them, who knows. But I do think that they both share that interest. And, I think that's all I could hope for. I mean, I would never try to push them into any particular career, but I hope that they always maintain that strong ethic of appreciating nature and wanting to protect it. And I'm sure that that'll always be the case with them.
I noticed that National Geographic is very involved in saving the planet, or taking care of our planet rather than saving it. Taking care of our planet seems to be what they're broadcasting. That was very much the message in your show, Ocean Soul. And I loved what you were saying the other day. So a lot of people were asking you questions about the conservation, and people tend to beat the drum of what's going wrong in the world and how terrible it is. And you said, well, I'm an optimist. I just loved that. And I like to celebrate the world.
Right.
How did you become an optimist? Because you've obviously seen the devastation that has been happening on the planet, especially in our oceans. How do you maintain being an optimist?
I readily admit that there are so many problems out there in the world, and particularly in nature. I see it in the ocean every day. And some of these things are tremendous problems. They're not going to be fixed easily. But I also think it's important to maintain a level of optimism, because I do believe that as a species, human beings have the ability to envision change and to affect change.
Absolutely.
I think that, our history has shown that sometimes, before the darkest hour is when we finally realize that we need to make some changes, and we do it. So I have been encouraged by rays of hope that I see out there. As bad as things are in the ocean, I'm seeing a lot of traction being gained in the conservation movement. Here just several weeks ago, there was a gathering of Pacific Island nation leaders in the Cook Islands, and they came together to talk about creating this grand Pacific oceanscape. It was sort of helped along by an NGO called Conservation International, but together they sat down and created this plan to effectively create marine reserves throughout the Pacific Ocean. Right. And many of these small island nations that never were given a lot of credibility perhaps on the world stage in years past are now, because of their EEZ, because of their exclusive economic zone, are being seen as real leaders because they can control huge sections of the Pacific Ocean, and together they can link these marine reserves to create a real amazing oceanscape that will be protected. Mm-hmm. And I think the rest of the world is waking up to the fact that this is what needs to be done. So that kind of leadership that's happening, and certainly in Australia has been a real leader in this regard as well, I think is very encouraging to me. You know, it was just a few years ago where we had almost no marine reserves in the world, and now there's almost this arms race of countries stepping up and eclipsing each other with bigger and bigger marine reserves that they're creating. Fantastic. So I do think that people are beginning to get it, that there is some hope, and with that will come even more change, I believe. You know, we are slowly coming around to it. So I remain optimistic because of those kinds of things. The people that I talked to, you know, when I spoke at the Opera House yesterday, the kinds of questions that I was getting, you know, we had maybe 1,000 people in the audience, and they were very interested. They want to do the right thing. They want more information. They want to raise their own awareness. And I think that's what encourages me and gives me reason for hope.
You were speaking about a place in New Zealand and a conservationist. What was the story about the man who had, years before anybody made a marine reserve, he got the government to make a marine reserve? What was that story?
Well, it's a great story. When I did a story back in 2007 for National Geographic about solutions for the ocean, because I had done the global fish crisis story, which showed a lot of the problems of overfishing. As sort of a solution, we talked about, we did a story on marine reserves, and I ended up going to New Zealand. And the gentleman that I first met with when I arrived there, it was a guy named Dr. Bill Ballantyne, who is sort of the father of marine reserves. And it was back in 1972 that he was instrumental in getting the New Zealand government to create the first MPA there, a place called Goat Island in the town of Lee on the North Island. And Ballantyne, you know, these were days when nobody was really creating MPAs, marine protected areas, and somehow he managed to do it. You know, he had to contend with commercial fishing interests who didn't want any protection. He had to fight even sport fishermen who were going to this place to fish off the rocks, and he even had to fight his fellow scientists who used to go to this place to collect specimens. But somehow he managed to do it, and the government declared this rather small place the first marine reserve in New Zealand, and the results have been astounding. You know, since that time, the place has really rebounded. The resilience has been incredible. You've seen the return of fish and kelp and all this other great stuff. And people have come back. You know, Ballantyne told me that in 1972, 3,000 people a year would go to this place, Goat Island. And when they made it a marine reserve, all the newspapers in New Zealand had headlines that said nothing left to do at Goat Island, because they figured if you couldn't go there to fish off the rocks, then there was no reason to go. Well, now, today, all these years later, not 3,000 people, but 300,000 people a year go there. And they go there, you know, not to go fishing, but just to see fish, just to see stuff, because it's so amazing how abundant the marine life is in this place, just because they protected it back in the 70s. So I think, you know, those are the kinds of stories that also give me great hope and optimism, because it's one man or a group of people that are dedicated to trying to do some good, and the results are so overwhelmingly obvious that it's impossible to deny. And I think that those are the kinds of things that we need to celebrate and use as examples.
Another question from Annika: how can people get involved in ocean conservation and seeing more of this?
Yeah, well, I love that question, because we do need to all get involved in anything that we believe strongly about, and ocean conservation is quite easy to get involved in. There are so many organizations doing great work, and I mentioned one earlier, you know, Conservation International, which is a large NGO, a non-governmental organization that does work worldwide. for the oceans and terrestrial conservation as well. But there are so many. You know, there was a woman at the talk yesterday from Greenpeace here in Australia. I think she was one of the founding Australian Greenpeace members. But there's so many. You know, there's Wild Aid and there's World Wildlife Fund and there's all these other. There's the Nature Conservancy, and I'm sure there are many local NGOs, many smaller non-governmental organizations, conservation groups that are doing great work. I often encourage people to seek out the big ones, you know, the large NGOs like CI, Conservation International, and some of these others, and get involved with them. But probably even more important is to sort of find regional conservation organizations that are doing work. You know, there are many everywhere I go in the world that are doing beach cleanups. You know, they organize these weekend cleanups where they get down and clean up all the plastic and the trash. They help people with understanding how to eat sustainable seafood. You know, they create these little seafood apps or cards that you can sort of hand out to people so they know when they go to a restaurant or a supermarket what foods to buy, which ones are better choices. There's all kinds of things that are being done. There are, you know, regional organizations that are trying to create marine reserves or protect fishing in certain places and make it so that it's sustainable. So I would just encourage people to sort of seek out and find organizations locally, wherever you live here in Australia, to try to learn more about what you can do in your own backyard, because I think that's where you can probably be most effective.
Absolutely. We have a Clean Up Australia Day that was, I've forgotten the guy's name now, that was invented by someone. People get into it every year, Clean Up Australia.
Yeah.
And I really believe that the energy of the now, Brian, in the young people especially, is I want to make a difference. They're the difference makers. They look around the world, they see the problems that are happening, and they say, how can I make a difference? I really want to make a difference.
Yeah.
I know that my daughter, you know, when she looks at people like you that are bringing awareness, that are actually celebrating this planet that we're on and making a difference, she just gets goosebumps when she sees people like you because she has that burning passion inside her to make a difference, to do what she loves, to also make a difference in her own life by doing what she loves, but also bringing awareness and making a difference in the lives of others. Is that how you feel about your life?
It is. Yeah. It absolutely is. I've always sort of felt this desire to do good out there. You know, when I was doing other jobs in my life that were fine, I mean, they were good jobs, they were honorable, you know, it was honorable work and so forth. It was fine, but I think a big part of why I never gave up on this career that I'm in now, going back to your earlier question, a big part of that was that, yes, I wanted to do a job that I loved and that was interesting and adventurous and all of those things. You know, I think a big part of it was I wanted to do something in my life that was meaningful. And that's just how I am made, you know. I mean, I can't really explain it any other way than to say that it's just something inherent in me that likes to do work that I believe perhaps makes a difference. And I don't think folks have to do that necessarily as a career. We can just do it as a avocation or a hobby or whatever. But whether it's, you know, doing beach cleanups or anything, I think people do, for the most part, want to do good things. And young people in particular seem to really get that. I couldn't agree more with what you say about your daughter Annika or just young people in general. Most young people that I meet are very enthusiastic, very passionate. They do get it very quickly. You know, it's not a difficult sell when I get up in front of an audience of young people and talk about environmental issues and conservation. I'm certainly preaching to the choir because they know it, they get it, and they do want to make a difference. They do want their world to be a better place. And I don't think that's overly trite. I think that that's really how they feel, and there's a great deal of enthusiasm. So, yeah, I certainly feel that myself, and even though I'm not a teenager anymore, I think it's very refreshing and encouraging to be around people like that, and that enthusiasm is very infectious. So
it is.
I certainly encourage everybody to get out and do what they can to try to make the world a better place and surround yourself with like-minded people because it is infectious.
It is infectious. And, looking back to the 60s when the young people wanted to make a difference, there was this huge movement of, flower power and love and peace. Maybe this generation won't get lost in the have-tos and the, got to make a living type thing and drop their idealism. I feel like the younger generation coming through are really creative in making their passion and their desire to make a difference into a way of life and a way of living. Filmmakers, musicians, all sorts of people, Reiki people and healers and photographers, and it's fantastic.
Well, it's true. And, I also think we're at a very exciting moment in history where, although there's a lot of terrible things happening to our planet, we're at a very exciting time in regards to technology and rapid development of communications and just, the miniaturization of technology and so forth. I mean, we can instantly communicate today in a way that we absolutely could not do back in the 60s or 70s when flower power was big. And, I think, we look back to those days, and I look fondly back to the 60s and 70s and the Beatles and the music, and I wish we had a little more of that today with, inspiring musicians and so forth that wrote about love and peace and great things. Those were all very noble concepts. But today, I think there is perhaps a slightly more practicality component to it all, where we young people look at the problems and want to come up with solutions. It's much more concrete, where we're using innovation and technology to create solutions. A lot of this stuff is very solvable, I believe. We can eliminate plastic bottles, for example, that are polluting our rivers and oceans. We can come up with alternatives that are biodegradable, or we can come up with alternative things that, rather than using plastic, for example, we can create technologies which are green. I don't think we have to exist and use the things that we've always used. There are very smart people who are coming up with better solutions for a greener planet. And I don't think that's Pollyanna. I don't think that's just fantasy where we're running around saying, peace and love but with no real concrete ideas. I think we have a generation now of young people who are very result-driven, and they're looking at the world. As I said, we can communicate instantly. If there's a problem happening in a part of the world, we can get on social media and expose it for what it is, and we can affect change. There's many examples in recent history where things have turned just because of the will of people. So I think it is an exciting time where, in a position to use technology and this enthusiasm of a new generation to affect change very quickly and get us on the right track. So although the problems are immense and daunting, I do believe that we have it within our grasp to see a very bright future here in the not-too-distant future.
I have to say, I absolutely agree with that. I really believe that our problems force us to find those intelligent and creative solutions. And there are plenty of intelligent and creative people out there finding amazing, incredible solutions.
Absolutely.
Amazing. I was at the Grand Designs recently. This is a home show, and just seeing some of the amazing technology that is happening for, like, I saw this lawnmower that's a remote control.
No kidding.
That you just plug it in and every now and then it just goes out and mows the lawn by itself.
Fantastic.
And
Wow.
I was thinking, wow, this is incredible.
I know. The future is here.
Don, it's been such a joy to talk to you. How often have you been to Australia?
This is my third trip to Australia, and unfortunately this is a very brief trip. I'm only here for about 5 or 6 days, mostly to do the talk. I'm also doing a talk for the Sydney Institute of Marine Science at their annual Emerald Dinner here in Sydney. And then, unfortunately, regrettably, I have to go home on Wednesday. I'm off to London next week and then to the Philippines on assignment. But I was here twice before for longer periods of time. I was diving both trips. It was 1998, the last time I was here. I was diving in Exmouth and in the Ningaloo Reef with whale sharks, and I went down to the Neptune Islands to do some great white shark diving, and I was here in 95 before that also to do some great white shark diving. So I hope to be back quite a bit next year. I've got 2 new stories that I'm working on for National Geographic that I think will bring me back to Australia. And if that does come to pass, I believe I'll be here for probably at least a couple of months, if not more.
Fantastic.
And very much looking forward to that because I love Australia and there's so much I want to see. I could easily spend years here and probably not scratch the surface of the things I want to do.
I know, and of course we've got that incredible barrier reef.
Oh, absolutely.
And I suspect you've seen some of it.
A little bit, but there's so much more I want to do. I mean, there are so many places on my list that I need to go and dive and photograph that are right here in Australia. It's definitely a place that I am pining to get back to and spend more time and some quality time. And I've had some lovely invitations from folks here that have invited me to come out with them and do some diving and spend time on the water. So I'm very anxious to return soon and spend some real quality time.
And you've got a beautiful book called Ocean Soul.
Yeah.
When did you put that together?
The book just came out not quite a year ago. It came out around Christmas time last year. It is a personal project of mine. It was published by National Geographic Book Division, and it's sort of a collection of my favorite photographs. It's got 160 photographs, I believe, about 25,000 words that I wrote about the stories behind those photographs and what it's like to be a photographer out there in the field for months at a time. You know, I talk about the equipment, I talk about sort of the struggles and the obstacles and the challenges, the loneliness, but the great exhilaration of being in the company of these wonderful animals, and you know how you become addicted to having these extraordinary encounters with everything from penguins to seals to giant whales and sharks. So it's a real labor of love that I sat down and did this book, but I'm quite proud of it, and it seems to be getting some attention out there. A lot of people are reading it, and again, that's a big part of what I like to do too, is to hopefully inspire younger photographers, new photographers, and I was inspired by photographers, so I'd like to be able to give back, and one of the ways to do that is with your book that is sort of your own personal take on your career, Your work is just sublime. It's absolutely sublime. There's no coincidence that you work for National Geographic, because they always employ the best, Thank you.
I suspect. And Brian, where can people buy your fabulous book, Ocean Soul?
Well, Ocean Soul is available wherever books are sold. So if it's not actually in the bookshop, I'm sure the folks that run your local bookshop can order it. It's also available online, Amazon.com, or any of the other online booksellers would have it as well.
Fantastic. And what's your website for people that are interested in
Right. My
your
website is just my name. It's brianskerry.com. So BrianSkerry.com. And the book's available there too, if anybody wanted an autographed copy.
And also you've got quite a few videos of you on YouTube showing your work, and even the National Geographic channel on YouTube.
That's right. Yeah, they've posted on YouTube sections of my Ocean Soul lecture, my talk, as well as some other videos that they've created about behind the photo, talking about specific images and how I made those photos, and those are available or can be viewed on YouTube. That's right.
Oh, honey, it's been such a joy. Thanks so much for talking with us on Accentuate the Positive. I really look forward to you coming back to Australia.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. I love it here, and I really enjoyed speaking with you as well.
Thanks, honey. Bye for now.
All right. Bye-bye.